With the defeat of the Whispers, the planet is in grave danger. Jenova's power grows, and the cogs of Sephiroth's plan begin to turn more rapidly. The Lifestream's foreknowledge, providence, and governance are called into question, blurring the lines between destiny and choice, confusing fact from fiction, and even corrupting the natural cycle of the planet itself. Yet this leads to another growing mystery. A mystery that reflects real-world questions about life and death. Of who survives and who perishes. Of who is saved and who isn't. While these answers continue to elude us, I believe we might be able to find some clues in one particular chapter of Remake. An overlooked sequence that culminates in a foe that may be the biggest clue we have to understanding Sephiroth's Endgame. Welcome back to our Final Fantasy VII lecture series. So what's happening in the train graveyard? Why include any of this seemingly filler content? Does it really matter? To better understand, let's pause for a minute and think about Final Fantasy VII's understanding of life and death. What happens after death? Is there anything at all? Will we know our earthly lives are done, and does anyone truly know what happens? Is interaction even possible between this realm and the next, if anything does indeed exist? Well, every real-world culture, whether humanist, spiritual, or religious, has grappled with this question, because death is the inevitable outcome of life, and it affects all living things. Every culture comes up with some different idea to ease the pain of grief, to make sense of this inevitability, because it is the eventual outcome of everything that lives. It's all part of the circle of life, the cycle of souls. Since releasing in 1997, the world of Final Fantasy VII has considered this same question. Famously, Hironobu Sakaguchi once said that 7 was his way of exploring and even coping with his emotions following the death of his mother, as he wrestled with many of these same questions. In an interview regarding 7, he said, "Ever since my mother passed away, which was when we were creating Final Fantasy III, I've been thinking about the theme of life. Life dwells in many things. And I was curious what would happen if I attempted to analyze life in a mathematical and logical way." As a result, Sakaguchi and his team created a story that focuses on a continual cycle of souls called the Lifestream. Now, in my last lecture, I focused on the memory aspect of the Lifestream, but the Lifestream isn't just memories. It's composed of the life forms themselves. In the original game, Bugenhagen explains it. He says, "The body decomposes and returns to the planet. That much everyone knows. But what about their consciousness, their hearts, and their souls? The soul, too, returns to the planet. And not only those of humans, but everything on this planet. In fact, all living things in the universe are the same. The spirits that return to the planet merge with one another and roam the planet. They roam, converge, and divide, becoming a swell called the Lifestream. Lifestream. In other words, a path of energy of the souls roaming the planet. A new life. Children are blessed with the spirit energy and are brought into the world. Then, the time comes when they die, and once again return to the planet. Of course, there are exceptions, but this is the way of the world. This fictional cycle hybridizes several real-world understandings of death and the afterlife by focusing on one commonality that transcends their differences, the concept of rebirth. The vast majority of human beliefs around death contemplate this big question: what happens after death? And each, in their own way, comes to some conclusion of reversing that power of death through rebirth, be it physical, like the reincarnation of Hinduism and Buddhism, spiritual in the form of an afterlife like in Christianity or Islam, or symbolic through a soul's enduring memory carried in others, a living legacy, as it were. Theologies of the afterlife offer real-world comfort to the living who grieve lost loved ones in addition to their own mortality, and Final Fantasy VII's world is no different. Characters regularly find peace in the idea that their loved ones have returned to the planet. Like their real-world counterparts, they put their hope in this cycle of souls, both for their loved ones and inevitably for themselves. Now, typically, this is an unseen occurrence in both real life and in Remake, but there are several times in Remake when this veil between life and death is pulled back, and understanding that may be the key to understanding the biggest mysteries in Remake. And once again, it points us to Aerith.
She told me strange stories, like how she and her mother had escaped from some sort of facility, and how she wasn't sad because her mother had just returned to their planet.
Their planet, huh? Yeah, that sounds about right.
I didn't understand any of it at the time. When I asked if she meant one in the sky, she said no, this one, right here. I mean, what can you say to that?
There's an old Celtic understanding of sacred locations called thin places that exist in between the extremes of reality. Spaces that are said to physically connect life and death. These places are where the veil between the worlds of the living and those who have passed on seems to be especially drawn back to expose the nearness of each to the other. Thin places allow a person to experience the echo or the whisper of the divine even while they are yet alive, and many tend to become the location of famous monuments, shrines, or temples in the real world. As we discussed in the last lecture, as an ancient, Aerith hears the planet's voice, will, and movement. Yet the voice of the planet is not always clear. It appears to be stronger in specific places, thinner spaces. Places like her flower garden or the church, and eventually in a temple and at an altar. But about halfway through the events of Remake, the party explores an especially peculiar thin place, a train graveyard. And in this often overlooked chapter, the party makes their way through a labyrinthine junkyard while being pursued or guided by ghosts. These ghosts are spirits of children, said to be wandering or captured. But these ghosts are not ordinary spirits. Aerith hears them, but she also recognizes them. And in this shocking scene, Aerith is haunted by their voices, remembering them from her childhood. A childhood marked by loneliness. These were her friends.
Are you ready?
Even as a child, she could hear the voices of the dead.
Well, are ya? I'm ready.
These children would attempt to play with Aerith, and she would cherish their company. But there appear to be limits.
Found you. No way.
Aerith could play with them,
We found
but they, having already passed on, couldn't fully play with her, as shown by her tangible, non-ethereal appearance.
I'm ready.
The distance between their realms was too great.
I'm ready.
She's the last Cetra, able to hear all the lives and memories within the live stream, but powerless to engage them fully.
I said I'm ready. Come get me.
It's heartbreaking, and it's haunting, because as powerful as Aerith is,
I'm right here.
she's still vulnerable to this, loneliness. Aerith's story is a mirror for anyone who's ever felt like this world wasn't for them, like they didn't fit in, that even though they had great ability, talent, they were misunderstood. In the train graveyard, she's whisked away and reminded of this, and it makes her feel lost and alone all over again.
Aerith!
Which makes it all the more meaningful when Tifa and Cloud, her new friends, find her.
Hey, we found you.
I guess you did.
But when they find her, they discover the reason for the ghosts. Eligor. And who or what is Eligor, and why does it even matter? In the Babylonian Talmud, a text of Jewish ceremonial and civil law, there's an occasional curiosity with the existence of demons, including this phrase from Rav Huna: "Each and every one of us has 1,000 demons to his left and 10,000 to his right." These legions of demons are organized under governing leaders, 72 of which are described in an anthological work called The Lesser Key of Solomon, a medieval compendium of demons that combines 5 earlier texts allegedly derived from the hidden knowledge of King Solomon himself from the Hebrew Bible. The work is meant to offer guidance in how to conjure and control those demons, invoking their powers to do the conjurer's bidding. As you can imagine, this is a particularly popular work in witchcraft and occultic circles. Each demon has a specific focus, from romance to thievery and even ethics. The list of demons in this work is often consulted for works of fiction and media, and in that respect, it's a cheat sheet for understanding any ghastly or demonic beings found in the Final Fantasy series. But for our interests here, one demon stands out: Eligor. In the Lesser Key of Solomon, we learn what Eligor is. He's a Grand Duke of Hell, appearing in the form of a knight, carrying a lance, an ensign, and a serpent. We also learn that he discovers hidden things and knows things to come. He has a knowledge of wars and how soldiers will or shall meet, particularly on battlefields. Now, physically, this description is really close to Eligor's depiction in 7 Remake, and even his abilities align with it. Several of Eligor's attacks reference his vision and sight ability, and one ability, the Winds of Gehenna, is a callback to a specific valley outside of Jerusalem referred to as a God-forsaken place, and a common word used for hell. Beyond these clear allusions, though, Eligor serves to prevent the soul, spirit, and memories of children from returning to the life stream properly.
The kids that the Black Wind carries away have to live in the train graveyard forever and ever.
So when Aerith, Cloud, and Tifa defeat Eligor, the natural cycle of life and death is restored, and these wandering souls return to the life stream. Now, this may have been a fine side quest, but why does any of this matter? Why include this in the story of Final Fantasy VII Remake? Why flesh this sequence out when it was so brief in the original telling of the story back in 1997? While many critique this chapter, calling it unnecessary padding, I would argue that it is completely appropriate for telling the themes of the overall game. As we've stated already, Final Fantasy VII is a story about life and death, grief and mourning, and finding hope and acceptance in the cycle of souls. And here, by disrupting this flow, not only is Eligor capturing the souls of children, but he's threatening the central system of hope for the world. What's at stake is the belief that there's something after death, something to help people live with hope and die with confidence, just like in the real-world ideologies and theologies that it emulates. These aren't vain wishes, they are lenses that help people live and die well, living and dying on their own terms. But this scene is also a moment of foreshadowing. Do you remember what Marlene said about the train graveyard?
And the kids that the Black Wind carries away have to live in the train graveyard forever and ever. So you have to stay far, far away from there.
What if she's foreshadowing another Black Wind, the whirl of whispers that surrounds Midgar at the end of Remake? What if there are souls caught up in the middle of that Black Wind, and they are trapped to stay there forever and ever without returning to the planet? But instead of Eligor, this time it's Sephiroth himself who's keeping them from returning. If so, it's possible that after the Whisper's defeat, every person who died or ever will die would now exist in some omnitemporal stasis within a life stream whose regular flow is now stagnant, where people are neither alive nor dead, but something more in between, unable to pass on. And by halting the natural cycle of life, the dead would no longer return to the life stream, leaving it vacant, empty, and powerless. And the souls themselves would no longer be subject to the planet's providence, but Sephiroth's will. Perhaps this is why Sephiroth would call Meteor, so that all life would die, and instead of having every person return to the planet, all spirit energy would simply absorb into himself. Similar to what he said in the original game at the Temple of the Ancients. Once the planet is hurt, it gathers spirit energy to heal the injury. What would happen if there was an injury that threatened the very life of the planet? Think how much energy would be gathered, and at the center of that injury will be me. All that boundless energy will be mine. By merging with all the energy of the planet, I will become a new life form, a new existence, melding with the planet, I will cease to exist as I am now, only to be reborn as a god, to rule over every soul. Imagine, every living thing on the planet, past, present, and future, all their strengths, all their memories, inherited solely by Sephiroth. He would take the role of the planet, becoming a replacement for it altogether, a life stream reborn within himself, the centerpiece of all existence, omniscient, omnipotent, omnitemporal. And it all begins by creating a thin place through an injury so great to the planet that the veil of life and death itself is pulled back. The death of the world through meteor is but a prelude to Sephiroth's rebirth as a new god. Sadistic and terrifying, the events in the train graveyard and the revival of the dead at the end of Remake amplify the original game's themes of life and death by actively subverting their cycle. It begs the question, is there truly comfort in theologies about death, even as it contemplates the different ways people respond to death? Some would run from it, while others might end up embracing it as a gateway to release from the pain of life, or even a potential reunion with lost loved ones. For instance, if people in Rebirth realize there is a possibility where time and existence are paused, might they sacrifice themselves to reunite with lost loved ones? Think of characters like Leslie, or Dyne, or even Elmira. They might make that choice if it meant reuniting with their lost loved ones. And then we don't know yet how these two realities will interact. Will they cross over at all? And if so, will they appear normally? Or will those caught in stasis appear as specters or whispers? And if that's true, is it possible that Zack could be watching helplessly at that climactic moment in Rebirth, but helpless as a whisper? Regardless of these speculations, this narrative decision allows a possibility to clarify lingering questions from the original game. For example, if all of this is true, then in future installments, we might see and experience the final battle against Sephiroth on two fronts. In the real world with the main party, but also with those captive spirit memories of the planet. And in Part 3, we might just find out how Aerith worked in the afterlife to unleash a final defensive attack against Meteor to thwart Sephiroth once and for all from the stagnant life stream itself. But that speculation is a conversation for our final video. So what's your take on the cycle of life, death, and rebirth in Remake? How does the lens of thin places and the train graveyard change the way that you see the story being told in this game? Sound off in the comments and be sure to like and subscribe because we've got a ton of content coming up between full lecture plays of Remake and our final Final Fantasy VII video lecture. Till next time, walk tall, my friends.